And I think the real turning point, I would say, for when I realized the importance of financial literacy was when I was 7. My parents, they had to change a flight and they got charged a $500 fee to change it. But I remembered that a year earlier when I was reading the book, I read something about how credit cards have travel insurance built in. I thought that kids would be able to understand if a resource just made it easy for them, which is why I wanted to try and close that gap between what kids were capable of and what the resources allowed them to do by creating easy peasy finance and using the animation, the question and answer format, and keeping the videos around 3 minutes long to keep a kid's attention span.
Welcome to Catching Up to Fi, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to Fi together.
All right. Hello, and welcome back to Catching Up to Fi. I'm Bill Yound, coming to you from a hotel room in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I'm helping out my mom. But the wonderful world of technology allows me to still podcast with my best friend and partner, Jackie. Jackie, how are you doing today?
I am doing wonderful and excited about today's guest. And explain it to me like I'm a 7-year-old. Have you heard that before? Well, it sounds easy, but it is hard and takes a special skill to do that. But our guest today, Rishi Vamdatt, has mastered it. To be clear, he was the 7-year-old simplifying complex money topics in a way that anyone could understand. He's been doing it for nearly a decade now, and he just blew our minds by passing the CFP exam at the age of 16. Bill, why don't you introduce him?
Okay, well, we met Rishi at the recent Plutus Awards. He's a 16-year-old personal finance educator, expert, genius, who has spent more than half his life making money simple and accessible to everyone. At age 8, he founded Peasy Finance, a platform and YouTube channel with a beginner-focused, but actually highly advanced finance content covered in about 5 to 10 minutes. The channel is now a multi-award-winning platform with over 1,300 videos. I think he's posted a video every week since he was 8 years old. Unbelievable consistency. He's had over 6 million views, 45,000 subscribers, and he's seen around 193 countries. Boy, does this kid, young adult actually, Jackie, have quite an impact. Every video is free, and Rishi refuses all sponsorships that comes his way, so he is unconflicted and gives fantastic advice. In March, he passed the Certified Financial Planner exam at 16. That is no small feat. And according to the CFP board, he's believed to be the youngest to ever pass this exam. Now, Jackie well knows that this is a tough exam, even for adults with years of financial planning experience. The average passing age is 37, and I think the pass rate is 65%. So, Rishi, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much for the amazing introduction, Bill and Jackie. I'm really excited to talk to you and about the CFP exam, my journey, or other topics too. It's going to be fun.
All right, Jackie, you're our CFP. Why don't you dive in? I know you want to find out how the heck you did this.
Yeah, as Bill said, we met you at the Plutus Award, which is an award for independent content creators in the personal finance space. And when part of your intro was that you just passed the CFP exam, I was scared to death when I took it. I was in my 50s. So I just want to know what the experience was like, even preparing, and how did you manage to get everything that you needed to be able to pass that exam on the first try?
Thank you. It was definitely a big challenge. It was by far the hardest thing that I've ever done. And over basically from the start of the coursework, which was in May 2024, all the way till when I started the exam review in January and then took the exam in March. But especially during those first 3 months of this year, it was really intense. And I spent a lot of time and effort preparing, which is what I think definitely was necessary in order to make me feel prepared and able to pass the exam. Like you said, it's very challenging. And really what I did preparing for the exam, it started even before I got into it really. So I was traveling in New Zealand And even on the road trip there, like while my dad was driving the car, I was listening to an audio review for the CFP exam to prime myself about the topics. So the review provider that I was using also had an audio resource. So I was just listening to that while I was driving and looking at the scenery. And since then, until when I ended up taking the exam, pretty much any free time I had, I was preparing for it. So of course, I did do targeted prep with the textbook or the question bank, and I did over 4,000 practice questions in that. And especially what I found really useful for the CFP exam, so I now do this when I'm preparing for exams at school or AP tests too, is that I went over all of the questions that I wasn't confident about. Because even if I had a lucky guess and I got it right, it's important that I understand what's the actual rule behind it. So just because I got it right doesn't mean I can skip it. And even when I wasn't doing the actual review, when I was going for runs or even while I was taking a shower, I was still listening to the audio review, either at the beginning to prime myself for the future topics and after to review the topics from the beginning, like the ethics and the fundamentals. And in addition to that, I also did practice questions from my phone or even at school when I had study hall periods. So it was really intense. By the end of it, the last 2 weeks of the exam, I was spending at least 5 hours per day preparing for it. So it was quite difficult. I think something that really helped me with this, especially with the time management, because I was doing this alongside continuing to make videos for Peasy Finance and all of my regular high school work, was gaslighting myself into becoming a morning person. So starting with when I did the coursework in 2024, I started waking up at 5 a.m. because otherwise there wasn't really any way for me to fit all of this work in. I remember when it was January, it was pitch dark outside and I was just doing these practice questions on taxes or estate planning. But I think it was definitely difficult because I'm still not a morning person. But I think that's what really allowed me to find the time to do everything. And in the end, I'm really proud that I was successful.
Wow, and you did it.
You and I were in high school once, and this doesn't sound like my high school experience. I was chasing girls, I was doing other things. I did my, coursework and whatnot, doing a CFP study and prep and passing the exam as an extracurricular activity. That sounds awesome. Time management sounds like it was really important. But Jackie, you did this. What was it like for you, and how does it compare to his experience?
Yeah, just as nerve-wracking as he was saying, I probably wasn't near as disciplined, but that exam is 170 questions. It's 7 hours. And it is just the whole environment when you actually sit for the exam, and it's a high stakes exam, and exactly as Rishi is explaining, except I think being a young adult, but doing that, it just takes a lot of discipline, which you obviously have. And we're going to get into that because your platform has grown tremendously. And part of it is because of your balance between school and what you're passionate about, financial literacy, and Bill and I share your passion. So why don't we talk a little bit about the early days? Now, I mentioned that you were 7 years old when you started this channel. Can you start there at 7 years old, come across anything about finance and actually understand it enough to where you wanted to try to teach others?
So when I first had contact with finance and money, it was even long before I started the channel. So even when I was around 5 years old, I didn't have the finance knowledge of concept or stuff, but naturally I was pretty frugal. So at that time, for example, when I was choosing sneakers, I told my mom to just buy whichever color is cheapest. Because personally, I didn't really care about the color. It wouldn't really impact me. But since it was all the same, I just wanted whatever would save the most money. And I also used the same backpack for 4 years of elementary school. And since then, I've also done the same thing now in high school. So since the very beginning, I was naturally frugal. And I think this really became apparent when I was 5 and my parents talked to me about Black Friday. And at that time, I told them that we should do all of our shopping only during Black Friday for the entire rest of the year. So at that time, I didn't really understand how it worked. That kind of instinct to try and save as much money as possible was really strong from the start. And now looking back after doing the CFP coursework, I can tell that was money vigilance. But since then, I've definitely grown a lot. And it's not like that anymore, which is a good thing. But that's how it first started. So after that, when I was 6 years old, I actually started learning about the concepts when I read I Will Teach You to Be Rich, which is what my parents were reading at the time. So they didn't want me to read it. It was just there and I was bored. So I decided to pick it up. But even though that's more about practical application for people in their 20s and 30s, I still thought it was really interesting. So after that, I got more interested in finance and read other books, subscribed to magazines like Kiplinger, and started gaining knowledge. And I think the real turning point, I would say, for when I realized the importance of financial literacy was when I was 7. My parents, they had to change a flight and they got charged a $500 fee to change it. But I remembered that a year earlier when I was reading the book, I read something about how credit cards have travel insurance built in. So during our vacation at the time, I was nagging them the whole time to check if their credit card that they booked it with had travel insurance built into it. And at first, they didn't believe me because I was 7 years old. So they thought maybe I didn't read it right or that it was just a niche thing that most credit cards didn't have. But then eventually, after a few weeks, I did convince them. And then after they filed the claim, they did get all of the $500 back, which was when I first saw just how powerful knowing about money could be. And that's what really made me want to continue learning more about finance and money. And also before my 7th birthday, as I was learning about the importance of investing, and I also learned how much birthday parties cost, I was thinking to myself that for just a few hours, I'm not really that happy during my birthday to be worth all this money that my parents were spending on it. So I told them before my 7th birthday to cancel the birthday party, just not have it anymore. And instead, I wanted to invest half of the money saved and use the other half to buy gifts for myself, things that I actually enjoy. That just even with half the money, I thought those gifts would give me a lot more happiness than just a few hours. And I was right about that. So I kept doing that. And the last time I had a birthday party was when I was 6 years old. Since then, I haven't had it every time, and I've done this. And then eventually, when I was 8, I kept on learning more about finance and finding these resources. But I also saw that no matter how hard I looked, all of the resources that existed were meant for adults, not beginners, and especially not kids, because the explanations had a lot of jargon or they didn't use visuals that were interesting, things like that. And I thought that the people around me weren't interested in finance when I tried to talk to them. But I thought that kids would be able to understand if a resource just made it easy for them, which is why I wanted to try and close that gap between what kids were capable of and what the resources allowed them to do by creating easy finance and using the animation, the question and answer format, and keeping the videos around 3 minutes long to keep a kid's attention span. And through those things, I was trying to solve the gap that I saw, which is that resources didn't let kids become interested in finance or learn about it, even if they weren't interested. And since then, I've just kept on going with, like you said in the intro, about more than 430 weeks of publishing weekly videos and continuing to grow and expand the channel.
This is fascinating stuff. And did your peers think you were a weirdo to be interested in all this finance stuff? They're not worried about this stuff that you're involved in. I mean, as we met your parents, they're both in finance, correct?
And not personal finance, but they do work at banks.
Okay, so there was something there, but I'm still trying to understand how you got so fascinated by this so early when we're all just trying to get out of bed and go to school. And then not only that, but you were incredibly creative. Tell us about the 2 characters you invented, because it was almost like Toy Story before Toy Story. Somebody was named Willy. I forget their names, but they were really interesting.
Yeah, so before I published my first video, I wanted to really think about what would make it interesting for kids and beginners also, but mostly kids, especially at the start. So what I found was that a lot of the TV shows I was watching and a lot of also books, but mostly TV and movies that were for kids had characters in them to make it more interesting. So I thought, why shouldn't someone that's explaining finance also have characters if that's something that kids find interesting and if that's what keeps their attention and helps them learn? So then I spent some time thinking about what the characters could be. And at the same time, I was also interested in doing accents just for fun. By that time, I had some practice doing a Southern accent. So I decided that one of them should be a cowboy with a Southern accent who was super. and the other one would just be regular, which is Wall Street Willy. And I portrayed Wall Street Willy as a stockbroker because he was the one who was answering all the questions and had the knowledge, and Super Cooper was asking them. So I thought that in this way it would be more interesting for kids than just someone talking about it, or even worse, someone talking about it without any visuals. If there's these characters as well as other videos and photos, that would make it a lot more interesting. And another part of the planning that was really important was before I published a single video, I came up with a list of over 100 topics based on what I had learned about finance up to that point. Since I really didn't want to just publish like 5 videos and then hit a wall thinking, what would I publish next? So I did all this prep work, which is what allowed me to keep going in the early years. And since then, I've kept on adding to the list. And now, especially when it comes to different things in the news or what I learned from the CFP coursework or exam review, I'm always adding to that list and thinking of new things.
Wow. So, Rishi, I'd love to hear about your parents' involvement. So, obviously, at 7 years old, you don't have everything you need to start doing these videos and all of that. And then they never really sat you down and said, we want you to learn personal finance. I believe everyone has a unique skill, talent, and bent towards something. And this is your something. So tell me a little bit about the influence of your parents and what they were doing right that sort of led you down this path, and how did they initially help you get started?
And so even though, like you said, my parents never told me to learn about finance, a lot of things that they did to continue my interest and to let me become more knowledgeable was really important. And that's what led to eventually starting Peasy Finance. And a lot of that is also things that parents in your audience can do with their kids, because it's really important to help them develop the kind of an interest in finance. Even if they don't end up starting a resource about it, just having that financial literacy is very helpful. So since the early days, what my parents did since before I was 6 was to involve me in day-to-day activities that have to do with money. So when they were checking out at a store, they'd tell me about how they're buying these things that they want and how they're using money to do that, or how they're paying using a credit card. Or the same thing if they're withdrawing money from an ATM. So that way, it wasn't like money is some secret thing that only adults talk about. It's something that they told me even though I was so young. So I started to gain an understanding of how money works, even if I didn't learn about the specific concept. So in that way, involving kids in day-to-day activities is really important. Another thing that they always did was to answer the questions I had, especially after I read that first book. I had a lot of questions about different areas of finance. I was 6 years old, so it's easy for a parent to just think that it's a fad and not care to find the answer if they didn't know it. But my parents always answered all the questions that I had. And even if they didn't know the answer, they just Googled it and then they got back to me later. So that helped me continue thinking that finance is something that kids can and also should learn about. It's not like it's only for adults. If my parents didn't answer my questions, then maybe I wouldn't have become so interested, but they did. And they also bought other resources about money, like the different magazines, Finger, Forbes, Money, back when it was print. And these resources that they bought for me also allowed me to keep getting interested. That did a lot to support my passion for finance. Another thing that's very important for parents, and what my parents also did for me, was to give me an allowance. And this, I think, started when I was 5 years old. But the most important thing related to giving your kids an allowance is letting them manage it. Because parents might think that they want to guide their kids on it or help them. But really, the most important thing is to let your kids manage money and also let them make mistakes. Because if someone is 20 and they've never had an allowance or never had exposure to money, and they start spending on a credit card, then it's easy for them to get thousands of dollars in debt. And that's really going to cost them a lot. But if a kid who's in elementary school or middle school buys some toy that they really like, but then later they aren't able to buy sneakers or a video game, then they understand a lot more about how easy it is to spend money, but that it's a lot harder to save money. And that's going to really help them going forward when it comes to creating a budget or balancing their needs versus wants. And another important thing is when saving money, parents can match their kids' savings like a 401k. So instead of just the kid choosing to save, you're incentivizing them to do that, which also builds these habits of saving money. And that'll continue to happen as the kids get older and then when they're in the real world. And I think an interesting way to think about this is that if you want your kid to learn how to ride a bike, you won't just show them a textbook about physics or show them about learning how a bike works. You just want to go with them and help them practice riding a bike. So it's the same thing with money management, where if your kids have an allowance that you give them and they're allowed to save money for goals and make mistakes, that's going to teach them a lot more than just theory on its own. Combining those two together is really helpful.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. You have to take theory and put it into practice and build the muscle. And it sounds like your parents did that with you. I'm curious how old you were when you had your first bank account, when you had your first brokerage account. I'm fascinated by the fact that you learned how to hack birthday parties and spent half of it on gifts for yourself. And I want to know what you did with the other half.
So I started my investing when I was 7, around the same time as what you're saying about the birthday parties, because at that time, that's when I learned about compounding, which is still one of my favorite things in money, but how important it is to start early. In all of the books and magazines I was reading, it's not like they talked about people starting to invest when they were 7, but because of all of the things that I learned and my parents supporting my interest in finance, I didn't think that investing is just something for adults to do. So that's why I really wanted to start on my own. But since then, I've been investing through my dad's brokerage account. It's not a custodial account, but I keep track of all the investments with my dad in a spreadsheet so I can see how my investments are growing over time and things like that. And I was saying how actually managing money on your own, as well as the content knowledge, is important. But that also showed up in my experience back when I was 7 or 8 years old. Because when I started investing the birthday party money, the other half that I didn't use for gifts, that's what I invested. At first, that and my allowance went into individual stocks. Because I thought, of course, when I was first getting interested in money, stocks were new and exciting. And I thought they were the right investment. But of course, as I learned more, I realized that actually index funds are way better for long-term investing, and stocks are just way too risky and don't have any of those benefits. So then, because I was actually practicing, I could take that knowledge and apply it. So since then, since I think around a year after I first started investing, I've only used index funds. So I've been able to combine what I learned in the content about how index funds are the right investment and actually apply that as well. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, Rishi, I think a big part of our audience, they are late starters, but that also makes them beginners. I myself went through a lot of your content and it was excellent even for adults. So I think the key word is beginners. It doesn't matter if you're 16 or if you're 55, you hit the basics and you engage people, like you said, with the visuals, and you make it very simple. You don't need 10-letter words to explain something. You do such an excellent job of that. So I want our listeners to have that takeaway, but also as late starters are getting their life together and learning this stuff, they can simultaneously teach and influence either their kids, nieces, nephews, or the next generation coming behind them. And you are sort of the face of that.
Yeah, I mean, your content is generationally evergreen. It is good for 8-year-olds. It is good for 50-year-olds. It is high level, high quality content. So whether it's Wall Street really or your other character, and then you come out of the closet and all of a sudden it's your face that's front and center. I want to get into some of the numbers here because when you talk about views and all this, you've had basically a full-time job and a YouTube content creator. You've been earning an income doing this for about 8 years. You've been investing your birthday money, your allowance money. I'm curious what your net worth is now.
Well, the net worth right now, it's not that much. But of course, because of compounding, the idea is that by the time I retire, it'll be a lot more. When I first started investing, that money was the most important, that had more time to compound. Since I started at 7, it's had 9 years to compound already. And since then, I've continued to invest. And like you're saying from Peasy Finance, the goal isn't to earn money or anything. It's just a little bit through ads. But that money as well, I do invest, as well as my allowance and gifts and things like that. So over time, it is growing. And that's the important part, to start early. And I also talk about in my videos is that your audience already knows this because they are investing. But for young people who maybe don't think that investing is for them, or who think you need to save up a lot of money to start investing, one thing that I talk about, which is also what I did to start today, because time in the market beats timing the market. So instead of waiting till you have more money or you have more knowledge, even if you're just investing $1 a day, that can still be hundreds of thousands of dollars in the future, as long as you start early.
That's a really good point and a really good reminder. So we are going to talk about some of your most popular videos, and we may have you sort of recreate a snippet on how you break some of these very complex topics down. But I want to know a little bit about the entrepreneurial side of your Easy Peasy Finance. You have the YouTube channel, right? Do you also have books?
Yes, 4 books.
And so what are the 4 books?
The first one was about money, and that covers things like what is money, but also other related things. Then what is investing, which has things like asset allocation or related to how to rebalance your portfolio, like the different investment options that are available. And after that, I published Easy Peasy Banking. And you can also see them over here. It's money, investing, and banking. And that covers a checking account, savings account, overdraft. And then there's also an activity book. And what I've tried to do with the 3 books is to take what has worked with the videos on different concepts in finance and apply them in a book format. Because I know that a lot of people, they don't learn best from a screen. Many people do, especially now that kids are growing up using technology, but there's still a lot of people who prefer having it on paper, where the kids can go back, reference other chapters, read it at their own pace. So I keep the same 2 characters. Of course, I can't do the accent on paper, but I still have the 2 characters in all the books, as well as images and simple language like in all of my videos. And the goal is to kind of continue what has been working with the videos into the book format. And I sold, I think, over 1,700 copies across all the books. So I think that's really strong evidence that what I've been doing is effective both on paper and in videos, and that it's necessary to have the resources across these different mediums.
That's fantastic. You're an entrepreneur, you're a creator, you're using your whole brain, and in my words, way ahead of the game and way ahead of your peers, I'm sure. They must all come to you for advice. So are you the CFP for every 16-year-old in your school or something like that?
I think actually what you're talking about is closer to the truth than maybe you thought, because when I was first learning about money when I was in elementary school, there weren't really that many people that were interested in finance other than me. That probably was the case in general too, but at least among the people that I knew. But now that I'm in high school, actually, a lot of people do have money from part-time jobs, or they're thinking about paying for college, and they do talk to me about it, which is really great. So I've talked to a lot of people about how they can start investing, especially people who have money from part-time jobs. If they start investing it in a custodial brokerage account or Roth IRAs, that's one of the best things that someone can do when they're young. I do actually talk to my peers about that, which I'm really happy to be able to. As time goes on, the amount of financial literacy is increasing, especially as it's being adopted by schools, and some people are becoming more knowledgeable about it, things like that. But it's great.
Yeah, and you're certainly helping with that.
Do you guys have a personal finance club at school that you may run or something like that? Have you got a group of your peers together who share your interest?
And not a sub at school, but I do share my videos. Some of my peers who are interested do watch them, and otherwise for individual stuff, they can always talk to me, and I can try to see where my advice or my strategies that I share align with that.
All right, so people are going to want some tips here. You keep it simple, and in some of your videos, you talk about investing, and adults, men especially, can make it pretty complicated. Now, we're not advocating for any particular funds, but when looking at your videos, you have a very simple philosophy for accumulation. What is that?
For the philosophy I share in most of my videos related to investing, it's like I was saying earlier about starting as early as possible. And the other part is to keep it simple and automate investing. What I share in my video specifically is an 80-20 mix between 80% S&P 500 and 20% international, is what I think is generally a good allocation for beginners, because in that way you're getting the benefits of the S&P 500, where you're diversified, you don't need a lot of money to start investing, and there's low fees, but also you have some diversification, especially if someone's investing for more than a decade. It's good to have that long-term side, probably actually even more important than the choice of what to invest in. is setting up the automatic contributions. Because if someone has to actually log into their accounts, transfer money, and choose what to invest in, that's adding a lot of friction into the process. But if you automate investing, which is dollar cost averaging, as you know, is the pretty much the best strategy for people investing for the long term. That's going to make it a lot easier. And it's also going to make sure you stick to it because you're investing the money before you have a chance to spend it. So instead of what unfortunately a lot of people do if they don't know about it, is that they have all the money from their paycheck into their bank accounts and then they spend it and then they invest or save whatever's left over. And because of how easy it is to spend money, because of advertising, sponsorships, a lot of times there isn't enough or there isn't anything left at the end. But if you do this dollar cost averaging into index funds especially, then you're able to automatically get that money invested. Yeah, another benefit of the dollar cost averaging, and something I talked about in some videos, especially when there's a recession, people can panic. And especially if you're closer to retirement and you have more to worry about with sequence of returns, it's easy to start worrying about it. But if you automate investing, you don't have to worry because it's just happening automatically. So personally, it's not like I check the market often because my investments just keep on happening. At any given time, I'm not tracking how the S&P 500 is doing or how the NASDAQ is doing. So I keep up with news that impacts my audience, but it's not like I need to stay that up to date on the market because that's so important to strategy.
All right. I have to ask you a higher level question here now because I'm just blown away listening to this. I could listen to this all day. And I wish I was a 16-year-old in your class because I'd have been retired 30 years ago. But at any rate, you have a US tilt. And I know you know what this is. You chose not to invest in the world market cap and you tilted towards US and a little bit less under the market cap for international. And I asked you this specific question because I know you know the answer. Why did you do that?
I would say that if you're like investing from the US and you live in the US, then no matter where you live, people generally do invest more in their own country. So if you're in the US, at least in the past, which of course doesn't always show the future, but the US market has been a strong investment. Looking forward, that should be most of it, but there's also the international diversification, which is kind of the math side, but also equally important, especially for beginner investors, is the emotional side or the psychological side, which also I've learned a lot more about through the CFP coursework. Because people from the US, they automatically want to invest in US companies. So even changing their focus from investing in the companies that they like or the companies that they buy from to investing in index funds of the whole market is a big step for people. And sometimes that could be uncomfortable to invest in index funds compared to companies that you know and you trust. And so going from the US index fund to an international one is another step. So I think at least when you're first starting out, it's better to be in the 80-20 split because it's a lot easier to get started as well. And then of course, as you go on and you learn more, maybe you can think about changing that diversification and as you near retirement, adding more conservative investments. But at least because most of my audience is beginners, that's what I think is generally the best step.
Jackie, what do you think about this?
I think it's great. And as Rishi knows, there's a million different asset allocation strategies. And I personally have followed Rishi's idea of keeping it simple. I don't need to revisit allocation again and again. So you do a masterful job, Rishi, of keeping it very simple because I think some people get confused when they hear all these different strategies and they're like, which one should I do? Instead of doing that, let's start with a very simple thing. If you have an inclination to want to do more and add more complexity, then go ahead. That's totally fine. But what I want to turn to is the investment vehicles. Now, you said you invest in a brokerage account with your dad, but you obviously have earned income a little bit from Easy Peasy Finance. So do you invest in a Roth? Where are you putting the money that you are earning from Easy Peasy Finance?
Yeah, you're right. The amount that's from Easy Peasy Finance, I invest that in a custodial Roth IRA. What's not earned income that I would love to contribute more, but since it's only earned income, the money from my allowance or from gifts that is to the brokerage account through my dad's account. For the custodial Roth IRA, that's also something I talk about in my videos since we've been talking about. It's a mix of things that appeal to kids who are in K to 12, basically, and also things for adults. Even on the explaining videos, I've also gotten comments from people who are in the 40s, 50s, 60s who are benefiting it. So I'm happy that you brought that up. And one important thing also from the CFP coursework is that optimizing for taxes, once you optimize for your investments, that's the next best thing that you can do. So once you figure out the strategy where you're investing in index funds and you set up the automatic investments, the next most important change you can make is choosing the right vehicle. So for young people, that would be the Roth IRA if they have earned income. This is also something I talk about.
Have you been maxing out your Roth IRA since you were 7?
I wish, but maybe in a few years, once I graduate college, that will be.
But when did you start it?
I started the Roth IRA was after, because for the first few years, I wasn't able to run ads, but I think it started in 2020 or something. But before that, I was just using the brokerage.
Wow. So you got a lot of compound growth in that Roth IRA. That's excellent.
Yeah, I mean, the breadth and depth of your knowledge at your age, I was an ignorant physician at 50 who was financially illiterate. And to talk to you with your high level of literacy really gives me hope for the future of financial literacy in youth. And I'm interested in your thoughts, because I'm sure you have some, on what you think we should be doing in schools, outside of schools, and as we grow up with our financial literacy and fluency. Are there things that you're noticing that our system isn't doing right and things that they are doing right that we should continue to do or augment?
I think first with what's working is that over the last 3 decades, the amount of states that have mandated financial literacy in high schools has gone up a lot, which is really important progress. And I'm happy that's the direction we're going in. I can also see that from my videos. Over time, the amount of views I've gotten from Google Classroom or from Instructor have also gone up. So that's a good sign to see. But other than that, the amount of work that's happening in high school is good. But I think there still needs to be more work done outside of high school, because a lot of money habits form based on what kids see around them. And that's a lot of times based on their parents. There's the one study about money habits forming by age 7. And a lot of this does happen during elementary school. If kids' parents don't talk to them about money, which most don't, unfortunately, then having some financial literacy in high school alone isn't going to be enough to have the full impact that we want for the next generation. Which is why I think having the financial literacy also taught starting in elementary school and also in middle school, in addition to high school, is going to be an important next step to improve the situation further. But even beyond school, then I'd say that's a good place for change across the whole system, for the whole generation through schools. But from the parents' side, that's also very important, because as much as a financial literacy class can teach at school, that's one part of it. But what parents do at home is another part that's also very important. So parents learning about how to involve their kids in activities, the importance of giving an allowance if they can afford it, and also talking to their kids and role modeling good money behaviors is the other half of it. That if that happens, then I think that would be really good for financial literacy. And I think we are generally moving in the right direction.
So Rishi, I have a question about some of the videos that you have on your channel. Again, you have 1,300. I sorted it by popularity, and I was kind of surprised that the one that was the most popular is probably the most simple. Can you tell us what that video was, what the topic was, and why do you think it did so well?
But it also did surprise me over time as it happened. And right now, that's what is a bank account. And I think what happened from when I started in 2018 is initially I covered the basic topics, like what are stocks or what are mutual funds, making a budget, and the different kinds of taxes and insurance. And those did turn out to be some popular videos because they were basic concepts. But I thought I had covered most of the basic topics. So then after that, I went on to some more advanced things. But then around 2020 or 2021, I realized that I had actually overlooked some of the really basic topics that were even more than when I started. So things like what is a bank account, what are income and expenses. And I realized that was an important gap to address. So that's when I looked back at my catalog and saw where the gaps were at the most simple level. And that's when I started addressing it through videos like what is a bank account. And at that time, I didn't realize it would be so popular, but I'm happy that it has reached a lot of people because these kinds of basic ones about earning money, spending, bank account, things like that are the foundation. So I'm happy that it's been able to reach some people.
Yeah. So is there any certain topics that you really enjoy explaining? It sounds like investing, you've gotten into that quite a bit, but what are some of your favorites and why are they your favorite for the channel to explain and break down as simple as you do?
Before starting the CFP coursework and reading some books about it, I didn't have that much knowledge about, but that's the psychology of money. So I really enjoy creating videos about that because a lot of times companies design products in a way that maximizes their profit, which of course that's what they're going to do. But people who are using the product, if they know how it's happening and how to address it, that can be really helpful for them. So one of the recent videos I made is about how buy now, pay later uses psychology. And by splitting it into 4 easy payments and 4 easy payments in quotes, and then just advertising the per installment price, your brain thinks of the product as just being that per installment price because the payments are over 6 weeks. So it's so far away. And another strategy, which I think is even more important, is by thinking about the cost of it in hours of work instead of dollars. So if something costs, like say $200 and you earn $20 an hour, then think of that as costing 10 hours of your work instead of just $50 per payment. And I think that's another way to add back the friction that companies are trying so hard to remove. And especially nowadays when there's so much advertising and when it's this one tap to make a purchase, those kinds of ways to take control back from your brain is something that's really interesting to cover. I'd say the most interesting topic for me to learn about is different from what I cover, which is the details of taxes and estate planning. I know it's crazy that I'm 16 years old and the most interesting thing is taxes and estate planning. But I think that's really fascinating because before starting the coursework, I didn't know about the details and the nuances of these laws. But now there's so many ways to reduce your tax bill and to make the most of your money, and how for beginners especially, and also for your audience as they get older, there's a lot of strategies they can use in addition to the regular retirement accounts that are really helpful. So in one of the recent videos, that was about the strategies I learned, which the top 1% or that very wealthy people use, but a lot of regular people don't know about, and they could be taking advantage of it, but they don't. So one important thing I talked about there is about the home appreciation exclusion, where if you're married and you lived in the home for 2 of the last 5 years, then you can just get rid of $500,000 of appreciation. And if someone doesn't know about that and they're thinking of moving homes, they might think that it's too expensive to leave, or they just wouldn't have all the information they need for that calculation. But if they know about it, then they would. And probably my favorite thing that I learned from the coursework is about the step up in basis at death, because a lot of people who aren't able to hire financial advisors or to have all of that knowledge about how to make the most of their money, they would say gift their kids the home that they're living in when they're still alive, or they gift assets in a brokerage account, especially right now when the exclusion amount is so high. That's not something that the vast majority of people should be doing. So I'd say knowing about these tax strategies is both interesting to me just to learn about how the code works and how to make the most of it. And in many places, it's applicable to more people than.
I know Jackie is fascinated these days with all the buzz about Trump accounts. I want to hear about Trump accounts from the kids. Adults are talking about them, this and that, but you have an interesting perspective. You've done a video on it, and this is a new hot topic, and I want your take on Trump accounts.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a new video. So now I'm doing more research and scripting that. But I would say it's confusing the way they structure and made the account. Because if you're born between 2025 and 2028, then that account gets $1,000 for free, which is, of course, that's great. So everyone should take that. But beyond that, more contributions that parents make are basically non-deductible traditional IRA contributions, which is the worst tax treatment of any retirement account. So I don't see why you would go out of your way to invest in that when if your kid has earned income, then a Roth IRA is better. So your Roth IRA, and that's by far the best. But even if your kid doesn't have earned income, if you're investing for their college, which a lot of parents are, that a 529 is guaranteed to be tax-free for education, but the Trump account turns into an IRA at 18. So that's only tax-free up to the amount that you contributed, not the appreciation. So of course, I would say that as it stands right now, things might change going forward. But of course, if your kid is born during that time, then the $3,000 is great. And if your employer matches your contributions, then it could be really good to consider. But otherwise, the alternatives, I would say, are better than using Trump right now.
Yeah. So my question to you is, you are 16. So you could open up a Trump account as a child because you're under the age of 18. Do you have a Trump account?
I do not, because I'd say for college expenses, like the 529, and for my retirement investment, that's to the brokerage account. So I don't see any need to open the Trump account in addition to it.
Yeah, and I appreciate your balanced take on it. And the reason why it's been all in the news and so many people is talking about it is because on July 4th, the app went live. And I wouldn't say that I'm fascinated with it, but I do want people to know the pros, the cons, and approach it in a balanced way in looking at these accounts. Yeah, you take the $1,000, but it doesn't have to be all or none. There's some great other vehicles out there that are doing the job, like the 529 and the brokerage account and things like that. But it's obviously a very good starting point for a conversation about investing for your child.
So does Maisie have a Trump account yet, Jackie?
Not yet. I got to the app because I was curious about what it looked like, but I wanted to see what type of financial literacy and education was included, because you've got the top 10% and a few financially savvy people that might have a planner that can maximize it. But I'm more interested in how is it benefiting the general public, low to moderate income people. So I was curious about the education for someone that was a beginner, that didn't know about this stuff. So they have some modules in there. They're not videos. And here's what I was thinking. I was thinking they should have been using content from Easy Peasy Finance or from Next Gen Personal Finance, because if the parent doesn't understand investing, how are they supposed to help their child? And so the financial education resources to me are very important. How friendly is it? How easy is it to get your questions answered? I plan to do it for Maisie because she gets $1,000, and I think it only makes sense to make sure she has that. But that's certainly not the only way. I started a 529 way before the Trump accounts were even available.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know too, Rishi. Have you talked with Tim Ranzetta and Next Gen Personal Finance? Because it seems to me that what you're doing would blend and merge and dovetail very well with what they're doing on a more formal level.
Yeah, I have talked with him. One interview was back in 2021, and another was on the speaker series with teachers, which was in 2024. I think the second one is really valuable because that was when I spoke to a lot of teachers who teach financial literacy to their students. And then I talked to them about how their experience has been and the challenges that they face, what could be easier. And based on that feedback over the next around 18 months, I worked on a free K-12 teacher platform that I have on my website now. And I think that's been really helpful. Now that's being piloted by around 80 teachers. And I think that's one of the most important resources that I've made, because I've considered what I learned from being on the speaker series for it.
Yeah, and I listened to that interview. That was excellent. And you also did many other high profile interviews. You did, I think CBS profiled you twice. I think they called you the child prodigy. Was that the one that called you a child prodigy?
In 2021, they said I was a whiz kid. I was 11.
Yeah, whiz kid. That's what. So we have all kinds of creative names for how smart you are at such a young age about personal finance. But they were just basically pointing out that you were learning all this stuff so young, to the point where you were teaching it to others. And then they did a follow-up. You passed the CFP exam and you explained all that to them. And then you've been on multiple podcasts, Choose FI, and many other things. Is there any one single thing that you're most proud of since you've been on this journey of personal finance and educating others?
I would say what I'm most proud of is the consistency, because since I started way back in March of 2018, now it's almost been 8.5 years. And I continued to publish at least one video every single week for now more than 430 weeks. And it's definitely been a challenge to do that all the time. I remember once in the first few years, I was already in bed, ready to sleep. But then I remembered that I hadn't recorded the video for that week. So then I got out of bed and then I actually did the recording when it was too late, but I had to get it done because I needed to publish that week's video. And also a lot of times when I travel, I publish videos during those weeks too. So it's not like it's a break. But for that to happen, I have to create them and the videos are scheduled to be published while I'm away. So especially before a trip, then I have to work on extra videos to cover that time when I'm not able to work on it. And of course, over 8 years, there's been a lot of stuff related to school through the AP test, and now most recently through the CFP exam prep. But through all of that, I have continued publishing the one video every week. And I think that consistency is really important for my audience and to continue sharing the concepts and the strategies.
Yeah, so much respect to you for that consistency. Bill and I are taking notes over here because we could probably both use some of that discipline. So that's extraordinary. And we know that will serve you well for the rest of your life, no matter what you're doing.
All right. So, Rishi, our audience may wonder why we're having a 16-year-old on the show, because we're 40, 50, 60 years old. What thoughts do you have for the late starter that didn't get it right from 8 years old on? And it took us a lot longer than it did you. What are your thoughts for our audience, those people that, you know what, they woke up to money and its power much later than you did?
I think that a lot of times, especially related to investing, including my videos that are meant for young people, show compounding as the earlier you start, the exponentially more you'll have when you retire, which is true. But of course, that would be really discouraging for someone who's starting late. I think a better way to look at it is that anyone could have wished they did things differently in the past, but it's not like you can go back and change it. Because even someone who started investing when they're 25 or 30 could have wished that they started when they were a teenager and invested in a Roth IRA. But since you can't change the past, I think focusing on what you can do now, like your audience is doing, catching up to 5 by investing as much as they can, or in other areas, like the strategies I share about not overspending, fighting back against companies that try to manipulate you, whether it's estate planning, things like the step up in basis, and otherwise just making the most of the situation as it is right now, I think is the most important and is what your audience is already doing by also listening to the podcast.
So, Rishi, when I first started learning about you, I obviously knew you probably had a really high IQ and you were probably a straight A student and all of that. And I kept thinking, I bet you he's going to graduate early from high school and he's going to get his degree early. But that is not the case. So you're 16 and you are a rising senior in high school. So you don't plan on graduating early. I'd love to hear a little bit more about college, we're finance show. So the financial part, how you plan on taking care of that between you and your parents. But then also, what are you going to be focusing on in college?
Yeah, I'd say right now, since it's the summer before senior year, most of my time that I'm not working on Peasy Finance, I am working on the college essays. I created a schedule for every day of summer break where I wake up and then I do 1.5 hours of working on essays. Then I go for a run and then I work on essays more. And then later in the day, I work on Peasy Finance. So that's something that I definitely am thinking about a lot. So first, for what I want to do in college, I would say that I don't know exactly what the major is, but something either relates to economics or business. And one important thing that I see is hopefully being able to do in college is conducting research, especially in the last decade or so. There have been a lot of studies related to the impact of financial literacy in high school. Of course, there still needs to be more work done to reach a consensus, but I think that's going in the right direction. But way fewer people are looking at financial literacy in elementary school. And we've been over a lot of the money scripts and money habits that happen from observing parents, though it's formed right in elementary school. So I want to investigate how interventions and teaching financial literacy starting earlier can have an impact on over the long term and can benefit students. So then that way I can both on my own work on improving my resources toward it. But more importantly, I think that will help support getting financial literacy to be implemented into a curriculum starting in elementary school once the evidence.
So you have your CFP now. You're the youngest one to have passed the exam. Do you plan on using it for educational purposes, or do you see a professional trajectory using that in the financial advice industry?
I'm not completely sure about what I want to do after college because that's still some time away. But definitely that is one thing I could do is working with clients individual. Like so far what I've been doing is mostly based on what I've learned, but I could also think about working one-on-one with clients, but I'm not completely sure.
Yeah, and just one clarification. So you passed the exam, but you can't use the credential yet. The last step for you would be to get your bachelor's degree. You have the hours, then you do the ethics and the background check, but you still need that degree. And then you can use that official CFP behind your name. Is that right?
Yes, and that's the part that I can't really do easily is studying for other things like that. But eventually, when I'm 22, I think I will be able to call myself a CSP professional, but not quite yet.
You're almost there, though. You're almost there. You got the hardest part done, and that's that exam.
It definitely was difficult, but I'm happy that I did it.
Yeah, Jackie also asked about, I think, your plans for financing college, and I imagine you're a bit debt averse. You're probably going to get 1,000 scholarships and can share the wealth, but what do you think is going to happen with that? Where do you think you want to go? We know what you might study, but does that worry you about the cost of college and how you're going to take care of that?
I would say it doesn't worry me, but of course it is something that I have to consider because I am also applying to third-party scholarships and some colleges also offer merit-based scholarships or need-based. Considering all of those factors and thinking about not making college for a lot of people, it is more emotional decision if they find their dream school and they really want to go there, and then cost is an afterthought. But I think looking at the net price calculator and thinking about how to pay for college or where that will come from, whether that's from money invested through a 529 or through loans or through scholarships or need-based. I think starting to think about paying for college while you're also making the list is something that I've been doing. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't do that, but I think that's one thing that you can do.
Gotcha. Well, as you embarked on your journey to college, that's obviously a very important focus of yours right now. But what about Easy Peasy Finance? How do you see that brand evolving?
I definitely do want to continue working in college and also beyond. But as has happened over the last 8 years, the Easy Peasy Finance has evolved a lot from those initial videos to then going back to the simple topics to now more recently talking about money management strategies for teenagers, young adults, and even older adults. As I learn more at college and as I become more knowledgeable and also talk to people and conduct the research, I think the direction or what I cover and how I cover it will change. But I definitely want to continue working on Easy Peasy Finance in different ways this time.
I think you should do a late starter series, quite honestly, and speak to the 60-year-olds like me in the audience.
He's a little biased over there.
I might need your help with retirement, actually. You're just inspiring. I'm going to have my sons listen to and watch this because for a 16-year-old to come as far as you have, as early as you have, with a fluency in a very critical language of money and finance is really just inspiring. And we're hoping to inspire our late starters to do so because late starting, as we've always said, isn't an age. It's a feeling. You can feel late at any time, and chronologically, it doesn't really matter. And you can always catch up, as we say, and it's a 10 to 15-year journey leveraged by generally a high savings rate. And when you start like yourself, you can keep the savings rate lower because compounding will do all the work. But a late starter series from you would be fun, and we would love to promote that in our audience. Jackie?
Yeah, he's twisting your arm over there. But this is fascinating. Now, how can people reach you, Rishi? Where's the best place to go?
My YouTube channel is Easy Peasy Finance, and that has all of the different videos. And if you want more resources, so free courses, infographics, the teacher platform, and other things, then my website is easypeasyfinance.com. And it's also linked on the YouTube channel.
I want you to know that I gave you a big shout out in a community of 100,000 people called the White Coat Investors, which is all doctors, because somebody asked, I've got somebody in grade school, middle school that I really want to have age appropriate material for my kids, my nieces, my nephews, and these kids. And I threw that out there and they were like, this is it. And they're jumping on it. We're happy to get your message out there. I'm really happy that we got to meet at the Plutus Awards. And I'll remind people that you've won 3 of them. How old were you when you won your first award?
I think that was in 2021, so I was 11 then.
Yeah, impressive all the way around. Jackie, do you have any closing thoughts for us today before we throw it back to real life?
Yeah, I just really want to remind our audience, we do get that question all the time. I have a kid, I have a grandkid, or what do I do for someone that is young and want to learn about personal finance? And now my answer is going to be Easy Peasy Finance, because it's done by a young person that started young, that creates unbiased, well thought out, easy to understand material.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really nice to talk about all the varied topics from my journey and then what I think about late starters. And it's also different from what I do usually with my videos. So it's nice to have a different perspective. I will make a video about that in the future and I'll let you know. So thank you.
And so I appreciate you for doing that, because that question comes up again and again. And now we have a great answer with a great resource. So thank you for that. And for our late starters, always remember, it is never too late. It's better late than never, and it's always the right time to catch up to FI. So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. And our editor is Fritz Brizard. We love them, and they keep us going.
Yeah, Jackie, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community, and we hope you love us back. If you would like to support the show and our mission to help late starters, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to make a donation. The link is in the show notes and on the website.
Check out the show notes for resources mentioned in today's show. Also, head on over to our website at catchinguptofi.com and check out our vetted resources, partners, and affiliates for discounts and their services, because we love sharing great deals.
Please share the show with others and head on over to our Facebook community to help us grow. If you prefer video, head on over to YouTube and watch the show there. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to FI. We would appreciate it if you could also leave us a 5-star review to help our message reach others.
And while we are financial educators that love to teach, remember that our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
So, Jackie, we'll see our audience next time on Catching Up to FI. Cheers.